Then I started reading about pollution from Eastern Europe, creating acid rain that pollutes the rivers of Europe and stuff. And I started saying, who's dealing with this kind of thing in Africa? How is it affecting us in Africa? Why haven't I ever heard about this? So I started reading about environment, and I got interested. People ask me, why am I emphasizing the work I'm doing now? You know, the people-centered approach to conservation. I really think that it started from there. Because that's where I really started asking myself that if among these people, about 200 people in this village, I'm the only one excited
to see
Ugandan excited to see a giraffe. Who is going to protect these animals? People created wildlife protected areas, initially as hunting areas. They were not really, they were not conserving. They were created for hunting grounds for colonialists and their friends. And so they were created for animals. And as a result, they isolated Africans from the land where animals lived. So overnight, Africans became trespassers.
Yes.
Overnight, they became poachers, not people looking for food.
Yes.
If animals would talk and ask them, what do you want us to do in order for you to survive? I guarantee that an elephant, a rhino, or a mountain gorilla will say, can you create a better relationship between me and my neighbors?
Yes.
If Rwandese continue valuing a chicken
or a potato
more than a mountain gorilla, you are going to spend a lot of money protecting a mountain gorilla.
We are in Nairobi. I'm Sunny Nayombia, host of the Long Form Podcast. My team and I are in East Africa's richest city to speak directly to the people who make the city tick. Welcome to the Nairobi Conversations, a meeting place for African conversations led by African voices.
This is the very, very best. I introduce the very, very next. Big deal, you know this is the big league. Sanga mumihanda ya chigari make a big fish. Word on the street turakaze. Habari gani mumeze mte. Yute shimi mana kuva honda muchiye. If you want the long form, come close mrabure.
Wait, what? The long form.
What did he say?
The long form.
What?
The long form.
The long form. The long form. Hello there. Greetings from Nairobi. My guest this week on the Long Form Podcast is Kaddu Sebunya. With a career spanning decades that have included stints in Oxfam and the Peace Corps, Kaddu is today the CEO of the African Wildlife Foundation, one of the largest conservation organizations in the world. In this conversation, we get to know him and his journey. And we'll also tackle the issue of human-wildlife competition, the likelihood of a mass extinction of Africa's large mammals, the future of conservation funding, and attempt to answer this question: is modern-day conservation just another form of neo-colonialism? Take a listen. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to make a deal with you. About 69.5% of you who watched this very podcast haven't hit the subscribe button yet. So here's the deal I want to make with you. If you hit that subscribe button today, I promise you that my team and I will keep making the show better and better in every single way. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button today. And now, let's get into the show. Kaddu,
Yes.
welcome to the Long Form Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for having me on this beautiful campus. That is not just a bush.
You are welcome. We are in the middle of Nairobi, but we are in the forest.
You know, it's As someone from Kigali, this is, I wonder if you Nairobi people actually understand just how rare such a treasure this living in with these mature trees. It's heaven.
No, Nairobi is the only city with a national park.
Yes.
So we are blessed in that way.
I'd like to ask you, we started talking about it off camera, but you know, the vast majority of your childhood was living under the dictatorship of Idi Amin. You were born in 1965.
Yeah.
How did that experience of not just that dictatorship, but all the things that come around living in that space, how did that shape the man you've come today and the career choices that you made at the time?
I think it was not so much about me personally, but my environment. For example, my father was involved in politics of the independence politics.
Okay.
Of the 60s. He was a member of parliament. After independence, he was a businessman. And when Amin came, those are the people he hunted. So my father had to run. Our family had to be dispersed, and so I didn't grow up with all my siblings. Some of them had to be sent to my mother's side, and rarely saw my dad. I lived with my brother bits of my life, and so it's those kind of things, dispersals, that shaped me. It brings you coping mechanisms to live in different places, study in so many schools, that you become a multitasker, multicultural, outlook also changes because of that. But also the politics was different. The lack of essentials also trains you.
What does it train you to do?
To be creative, to be reliant on your systems and nature and what is available. I didn't grow up with plenty of sugar and plenty of toys and plenty of running water and plenty of, yet I was city born. So it's slightly different when you grow into in those in the world of peace and plenty and things. But that was at a later age. When I was young, from 60s and stuff, I was with my family. For me, I think that shaped me more into this African thing. My father was involved in so many of the Pan-African movements, and I never saw myself as a typical Ugandan or tribal or in any formal way. And his friendships with the Indians who are his business partners, with the cardinal, he was a good friend of his who came home.
Cardinal
Wamala, who came home.
What was your father's name?
Sebunya.
Sebunya.
Isakiwe Sebunya, MP from Mukono.
Was he a member of the Democratic Party?
He was member of KY, which was Kabaka Yeka, and he used to work in the palace, but they crossed and joined the UPC because he became a nationalist.
Oh, was that around 1966?
1966. He was a nationalist, and he saw Uganda as one, and he saw Africa as one. So they crossed into UPC, became a UPC member of parliament, and then Idi Amin came.
And he was hunted.
But he survived.
Oh, thank God! He hadn't finished that part because you said he was hunted.
Yeah.
And I was waiting because the regime was known for hunting and killing.
Yes. Yes. And many of his friends.
Yes.
In fact, one of his friends was Sembeguya, who was the minister at that time when Amin came power. He was killed when he was coming from home, our home. Yeah. He came to visit. On his way back, he never reached home.
We now have this term that we talk about, trauma.
Yeah.
And very often when I talk to people of my father's generation, that generation, they'll tell you stories, and you'll ask yourself, how are these people sane? How, with everything that they've seen? Even when you're talking about your dad and the displacement, because that was being displaced. You was maybe 6, 7 years old. How does that affect a child, and how they see the world?
Yeah, it does in a way, but you are protected at the same time. Honestly, I don't, for example, recall the suffering. No, because you grow up with the parents make sure that actually you don't realize
that there's no sugar.
That because they will provide whatever sugar is there will be for you, not for them.
Yes.
So they will make sure that they create an environment that you survive. I don't really remember a lot of the sufferings of as suffering. I just remember seeing the movements and the people coming home and destroying things and looting our place and killing the animals and cows and taking property, fetching property out of our house. I saw that, but we are protected from it, as far as our lives are concerned, and that's what parents do. Your uncles, your aunties, that's the extended family in Africa. That even when your dad is not there, somebody feels that space is either your uncle, your big brother, your auntie, your big sister, your neighbor. So those shock absorbers, I think, and that's how wonderful the African culture is, and our heritage, which we need really to maintain our way of life.
And then you go to Makerere.
I got to Makerere.
What year was that?
From Mwiri. That is 19. I mixed the years. That is 19, I think, 84, I think.
Ooh, just right. It's...
Because Museveni came when I was in Mwiri last year. He came when?
No, 86.
86. So I was with Makerere 87.
So your whole high school is during the Museveni...
Yeah, exactly. That's why I changed schools.
Insurgency.
So I went to 4 schools during that time.
Running
because
away
Kampala, you would go to a class,
and
that's how I ended up in Mwiri.
Yes.
You go to class in the morning, at lunchtime they're saying this class is closed, or everybody go home.
Why?
Because there will be bullets during that afternoon, or the bullets will start in the morning and then you want to go to school.
Yes.
So you'll be running all the time, and then
from school to school.
Then they say, maybe you need. Then I went to boarding school in high school.
Yes.
That's and they said, you gotta settle down in a boarding school. So I ended up in Mwiri. But I studied in so many schools in Kampala because of
running away from the
because of that stubbornness in schools, and I said we can't. You gotta go and look for another school.
What were you doing? When you say stubbornness, what do you mean?
Yeah, no, I question things. I want to know why we can't do this or that, or why someone is asking me to do something else other than what I want to do. So I question things. I question authority.
Was that as a result of your upbringing, or is it something within you?
It's a result of upbringing. Conversations at home are political, and everybody has a voice. Everybody has pretty much.
And
it's a big family, and we grew up with our cousins and aunties, and I grew up with so many people.
Yeah.
So
and you learned how to speak for yourself and to be heard.
Yeah, pretty much.
Before we continue, if you live in Kigali, what do you do to stay strong and healthy? Do you want to get fit without breaking the bank? If you are like me And the answer is a resounding yes. Join Waka Fitness, Kigali's top fitness hub with expert-led workouts in a state-of-the-art facility, high-end equipment, and an unbeatable community vibe. And here's the best part. As a listener of this podcast, you get 20% off your membership. The thing is, this deal ends in August. So just hit the link in the description, www.waka.fitbase.rw/thelongform, or scan the QR code on your screen. Join Waka today. Get strong, feel good, and live life abundantly. But you did not, when someone hears about you as CEO of the African Wildlife Foundation, they would assume that there is a environmental biology background, or there's a background in zoology, or microbiology. But that's not actually the case. What did you do at university?
I studied political science and sociology.
Okay.
That's my first degree at Makerere.
Why?
No, I wanted to be a lawyer.
Okay.
It's interesting when I tell Ugandans or anybody else that when I grew up, there was one university in Uganda.
Yes.
So you go to high school, you apply to one university. And that university will say, those who pass these grades, they studied this course, they studied this course, but of course you apply. So you apply to a university. I applied for law.
Yes.
I missed it by a point. And then they give you an alternative course.
Number two.
Yeah, number two, your choice. And then you take it because what other university? So I can't tell you that I chose political science and sociology because that's what I liked. No, that's what I was given.
But
that's
obviously
that's what I qualified for.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you.
Then after that, my career experience. I had brothers who were working for the UN and international organizations, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go and work for international organizations.
Well, you accomplished that.
Yeah, and also, at that time, also drive those big Land Cruisers, and I said, look, this is what I want to do. And I was told that to do that, you must, to work for UN, you must speak French.
Okay.
So I did speak French.
Obviously.
And so
Kampala boy.
Yeah. So I was told that, French.
Yes.
And I was lucky. My brother said, if you want to do French, I have a friend who had become now a family friend.
Yes.
In France, in Strasbourg. That's a city in France. That I will talk to him and see if he can host you and go and study French from there. So I said, well, I'm on. So I went to Strasbourg, Strasbourg University, 8 months learning French.
Yes.
So that I can go to the UN.
Yes.
It did happen. So while I was there, there were turns and corners and.
But what are the turns and corners? What happened?
I was staying with somebody who was a family friend.
Yes.
He was working at the European Council, Council of Europe, which has headquarters in Strasbourg. And Council of Europe, that was very early days before the European Union. They had the economic union at that time of Europe. But the council was setting policies that managed that economic union. And he was a European civil servant in Strasbourg, but from UK.
Family friend.
Yeah, family friend. But my brother knew him, but he became a family friend. My father became close to him too. So while I was there, I was, as political as I were, I was so interested in what was going on in the policy discussion, economic policy discussion in Strasbourg.
In Europe.
But all European leaders will come to Strasbourg.
Yes.
I first heard the word environment from Margaret Thatcher.
Yes.
Margaret Thatcher comes to
the Prime Minister of the UK. Yes.
She comes to Strasbourg, and she's opposed to the environmental policies Europe was setting up for the entire European countries to manage environment. And she was so charged, but she was so exciting You know, I think she was at that time she was the only first woman leader.
Yes.
And so she was very, very, very charismatic. And I followed her. And I was like, why is she agitated about environment? What is that word? What is environment?
Yes.
And then I read in the
This
papers.
is 90 what?
Ooh, that's from a Cairo University. That was, I think, 89.
89.
89. 89. So she was adamant about environment. She was saying that policies cannot govern UK. UK is going to be independent of all those policies. Then I started reading about pollution from Eastern Europe, creating an acid rain that pollutes the rivers of Europe and stuff. And I started saying, who's dealing with this kind of thing in Africa? How is it affecting us in Africa? Why haven't I ever heard about this? So I started reading about environment, and I got interested.
Yes.
So I started asking people what it is, and I said, you know what, I really want to know more about this.
Yes.
And somebody told me that there is a college, a European college, a small college, which in the UK, it was the first in Europe. That was an agricultural college, but Europe turned it to an environmental college. That it teaches European civil servants about environment.
Yes.
So I said, okay, I'm gonna write to them and tell them, I'm here, I'm interested to learn more about this, and I applied.
Just like that.
Just like that, and they accepted me to do a master's in environment.
But had you already graduated from academia?
Yeah, after graduation,
then
from
you went
Makerere,
to Strasbourg.
I went for my French.
Yes.
And actually, I went the night after finishing my exams. I didn't wait for the graduation ceremony, so I don't have don't ask me for photos.
Nothing.
No, I left the night after my final exam.
Do you at least have your papers?
At least I have my certificate, yes. So I got into this college.
Yes.
We were 3 Africans, two from Ghana, and me,
And
the rest of our classmates were from Europe. There were 2 Americans, and that's it.
But I don't understand. So I'm more interested in understanding why would the university admit an African who has no science or environment background? What?
Yeah,
why did they find you so
at that time,
interesting?
Actually, at that time, environment was defined different from how we are defining it now. This university, to do a master's I did, you had to do 18 courses. They understood environment to be a subject on everything.
Yes.
So it's like being in S1. We went to this college. I would do soil science. I would do urban planning. I would do agriculture. I did agriculture. I did pollution science, chemistry. I did the international development as part of the course. I did the physics. As part. So 18 courses.
No, that sounds like high school. That's
yes,
high school.
Exactly. It's high school. And it's because your background didn't really matter so much. It's your capacity
to learn
and interest. Because I was in classes where I was doing very well, because from political science and sociology, and at HSC I did economics, literature, and geography. So those are very important subjects for environment.
Yes.
And rightly so. And I was sitting with people who had done chemistry, physics, and biology.
Yes.
But they had to learn geography.
Yes. And communication.
So you see, that was really a very good training for me. And you qualify as Masters of Policy, Master of Policy and Agrarian Development.
Yeah.
That's what I got from there.
And then you also end up with another paper in law.
Yes, but that took longer. Yes, finally. Yes, that took longer. And that's had a different conversation about it. Because after UK, I headed back to Uganda.
Yes.
Yeah.
What did you do in Uganda?
While I was in UK, I still wanted to work for international NGOs. So after my course in environment, there was no Ministry of Environment in Uganda. So
Really?
No. There was no Ministry of Environment when I finished. So I went and applied for. I know I looked for I applied for international jobs
Yes.
in Africa. All international organizations work in Africa.
Yes.
And of course, I had no experience, so I got no job. So I was in London one day. I saw a sign, water aid.
Water aid, yeah.
Yes. And I walked in and I said, look, I want to go back to Africa. You guys have programs in Africa. I want to volunteer. And they said, where do you come from? Uganda. And they said, I gave them my information. After 2 weeks, they called me and said, look, there's a job. You can talk to our office in Uganda. We forwarded your work. So I flew back to Uganda. I walked into this office in Uganda and I told them that I'm here. I talked to your folks in London. I want to volunteer. And the guy told me that he had been in Uganda for 3 years. He had never seen a Ugandan walk into an office and say, I want to volunteer.
Yes.
And he said, you have a position here.
It's really funny, life is, for me, I always call it a series of crossroads where one thing can happen, and if you don't meet that crossroad at the right time,
Yes.
it will just
Absolutely.
not happen. Because
Absolutely.
now I'm thinking about this.
Yeah.
You just happen to be in Strasbourg because you wanted to learn French.
Yes.
And now because you're in Strasbourg, you saw Margaret Thatcher. Now
Yes.
because of Margaret Thatcher, you go to university. Now
Yes.
because you're in London, walking around
Yes.
randomly,
Yes. Yes.
you see a sign.
You know what Mark Jordan said, a basketballer?
Yes.
He said, there's luck in sports, but you can meet luck through your hard work.
Yes.
Luck, luck doesn't find you in bed. No, doesn't happen that way. It's while you are working hard,
Yes.
then you come across luck.
And the hardest workers are the luckiest people.
Yeah, exactly.
So from Water Aid, back in what? That might have been maybe 91.
Yeah,
90?
Water Aid just really found me. They sent me, it was a sanitation program. They are running in Uganda, water and sanitation. They first sent me to Mbale in Mountain Elgon area. Again, close to National Park.
Yes.
And we are doing gravity work. We did gravity work on the mountain water supply there. And I was doing sanitation work. And I was not paid. It was a voluntary work. I did that for 2 months. And this guy said, look, you have talent here. We are designing a project in Western Uganda. And I want you to lead it. But we need to raise money. And you've been to London. So I want you to go to London, our office in London.
Yeah.
We want to create advertise for this program. And we want you to be the main person. So I was in posters. In London, they were sending bills to everybody who's paying water bills with my photo and request to fund this program in Uganda. We got the money. I became the manager of the program.
Yes.
And guess where the program was? Again, like you said, coincidence.
Yes.
They gave me a Land Rover.
Yes. The Land Rover that you always wanted.
Yes, they always wanted. They gave me a Land Rover and said, you go to Western Uganda and start this project. And I said, where is it? It's on a fishing village in a place called Mashoro in Queen Elizabeth National Park.
Wow.
So it was like fate.
So the fates are pushing you towards conservation.
So I arrive at this village. My Land Rover is the first car in this village. My road, I drove this car from the main road, which was a place called Uganda. And I drove this car to Mashoro from a footpath. So my car created the main road that is there.
Yes.
Arrived in this fishing village. I told them what we are trying to do. They laughed at me. They said, you want to provide water. It's a hand-dug well. You want us to dig a well, you put a pump on it for us to have clean water. But we live on a lake. Are you crazy?
I mean, there's a point there.
There's a point there. So that is where really I learned, how do you mobilize people who live on a lake? It's a huge challenge to ask them to dig a hole on the ground and get clean water. We did it successfully. And we did wells there. But while I was there, in a national park, because this lake is Lake George. It's in Queen Elizabeth National Park. I will see wildlife. I will see hippos. There will be giraffes. There will be, you hear lions at night. There was the Rwenzori with this snow top every time the clouds came down. And I had a camera, which I bought in UK, and I was taking photos, excited to see wildlife. But I was the only person in that village excited to see this wildlife.
Yes.
And people were saying I was crazy. I was smoking something. And they thought I was crazy.
I mean, why not?
Yeah.
Imagine, because if you think about it through their lens, these animals are dangerous or they are food.
Yeah. No, hippos were food.
And the lions would eat
the
them.
local leaders on Independence Day, they would slaughter a hippo legally,
Yes.
And so I know it's for me it's that time. People ask me, why am I emphasizing the work I'm doing now? The people-centered approach to conservation. I really think that it started from there, because that's where I really started asking myself that if among these people, about 200 people in this village, I'm the only one excited,
To see a
Ugandan,
lion.
excited to see a giraffe. Who is going to protect these animals?
That's a fair question.
Yeah. Who takes care of them? So that's where I started asking that question. And the more I asked it, the more I tried to find answers. It led me to some NGOs that were working, that were providing the answer to my questions. And I became friends to a few Europeans who are doing work in different international NGOs that are doing conservation. Then I heard more about what they're doing with protected areas, what they're doing with the wildlife, and the all scientists, the science behind it and stuff. And I said, what, I really, this is what I want to do. But at that time I thought I'm not a scientist.
Yeah.
It's going to be very hard for me to do that. But I said, look, I'm really interested in that. But it took me time to really get involved, because after WaterAid, I went and worked for Oxfam, which is completely emergency work, has nothing to do with conservation.
Oxfam, Peace Corps, but
Oxfam, Peace Corps, yes.
Yes, but then eventually you come back.
Peace Corps actually brought me back to the environment.
But and that's where one of the things that I noticed about your career is that you've not only been breaking your own boundaries as a human and your expectations for yourself, you've, by your role today and what you do, you've also broken a certain glass ceilings for people who look like me and you. You're only the second African to have led this organization, African Wildlife Foundation. For Africans, for African wildlife. The only second African since its founding in 1961. You must be very proud.
Yeah, actually, I'm the first one. Because I think the person you are referring to was a president here, but he was under CEO, who was American. Yeah.
So the very first.
I'm the very first African CEO. And even beyond this organization, when I became CEO, I think I'm still the first African CEO of an international conservation organization.
Why? What goes wrong? What happens?
That's the story of conservation sector in Africa, really. It's almost less than 5% of NGOs working on this continent in conservation are led by Africans. It doesn't make me feel good. It's very uncomforting, but it's the story of a sector that is being dominated by science, that has been outsourced by Africans, that has been both in funding and the work itself, that has been introduced to this continent in a very bad way. It has a bad history. That has been isolated from Africa's experiences and Africans
As a
people that we are struggling with as the largest African conservation NGO to correct those errors.
Do you think so? I'd like to ask this question because I think that the issues around African conservation and who owns it are conversations that I know happen here in Kenya,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of controversy.
Yeah.
In Rwanda, not quite as much. There's still conversations, but I think we've moved a few steps in trying to rectify the imbalances within our conservation sector. Is it by design? So when you think about a lot of how our parks and protected areas were designed, they were designed to keep the Africans out, right? When you talk about, and they were not fundamental, you know, when you think about, you know, how parks were created,
Yeah.
they were fundamentally a colonial and then a neo-colonial structure. That's, at least that's my assessment. I don't know if I'm wrong.
You are right, but not correct.
Okay, let's hear this one.
Yeah.
Why am I right?
You
And
are
then after
right.
that,
You are
why am
right
I
because they are
not-
created by colonialists from a colonial perspective and colonial interests.
Okay.
You are wrong to say that they were created to isolate Africans
From their own.
from their. No, they were created for animals, not for Africans. That's different. The people created wildlife protected areas initially as hunting areas. They were not really. They were not conserving. They were created for hunting grounds for colonialists and their friends. And so they were created for animals. And as a result, they isolated Africans from the land where animals lived.
And where the Africans also lived.
And where Africans lived and owned and worked. You know? And owned the land. You know? That's the sad part of it. You know? So overnight, Africans became trespassers.
Yes.
Overnight, they became poachers, not people looking for food,
Yes.
you know, and protein. So they become, you know, overnight, they became workers on their land, you know, and then they started being ruled by rules that they were not involved in creating and policies that they were never really had any discussion on. That's how protected areas were created. And many, there are more than 8,000 protected areas on this continent. Just think about that.
And then our post-independence government just came and did not examine the principles behind that. They just came and did the exact same thing.
And even expanded and created more.
Within the same framing.
Using the same framework. And as recent as 20 years ago, I mean, it's not that this happened post-colonial. No. I mean, immediately. No. You hear even discussions today of some governments trying to create, through carbon credits, through climate change movements, trying to create and protect forests and turn them into, through the same methodology, the same work, but this is Africans doing it to Africans. So that's why for those who think that it was about race or it's about foreigners, no, it was about the approach. they used, which today some conservation groups are using, even today, in protecting wildlife and nature. So it hasn't changed. So that's why I was telling that you are wrong, in a sense that it was not a colonial approach to this, or intentional isolating of Africans from areas where white people lived. It was nothing to do with that.
No,
it was more about, the scientific and conservation approach and of protectionism that today our governments, our leaders, and some even African conservation groups are using to protect nature and wildlife today.
So we protect, because that's for people back home in Rwanda, they know of the Dan Fossey.
Yes,
the Dan Fossey as
they know
a person.
The different versions of Diana
But then
Fossey,
I know different versions of Diana Fossey,
Yes.
and in the West she's celebrated as this great person who saved the gorillas. When you talk to some people on the Rwandan side who actually had to deal,
No, she was
with
killed. Yeah.
but she was not. They believe that she cared more about the gorillas than she cared about the people.
There are people who are like that in my sector. Still.
And a lot of them are people who don't look like me and you.
Yeah, but some do. So I think, and this is I emphasize that point, that it's not about the race. It's not about the color of your skin, but it's the approach, it's the ideology behind the work people are doing. So it's just that it's dominated by white people. It's dominated by non-Africans. That's why sometimes people think that it's more of a race, and it's more of a wrong approach, a wrong strategy being used by conservationists to think that they're going to protect nature that way, especially in this continent. And we know today that that approach hasn't given us the results we want.
I'd like to talk about that approach.
Yes.
The very first time I met you was in 2018. You were in the present position. I was working for the Rwanda Development Board in their media department. And the AWF, the African Wildlife Foundation, had a piece of land, about slightly over 27 hectares in Kinigi. Now, for those who don't know Kinigi, it is obviously home of the mountain gorillas, but on the other side, it's also a breadbasket of Rwanda. That's where we get tons and tons of potatoes and maize. And I would like to have a good understanding of the why. So when you gave that land to the Rwanda Development Bank, Rwanda Development Board, it is to expand the Volcanoes National Park, which obviously I understand the thinking behind that, right? The gorillas need space.
Yes.
So that there's less negative outcomes for them. The other side of the argument was that this land, we also have a growing population. We need more food. That was land that could have been given to farmers to produce tons and tons and tons of potatoes to feed our constantly growing population. What was the thinking? Because what we've been talking about, right, is saying that it's not about animals here and humans here. If you want to save the animals, there has to be a symbiosis between the two. What was the thinking behind you giving land to government organization, knowing that it's going to be used to expand the park, and while also acknowledging that is precious land that could have been used to feed a growing population? How do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah. There are several models people have used to conservation. For us, we believe that conservation cannot be an end in itself.
Okay.
So you can't just like elephants as an end in itself.
Or gorillas.
or mountain gorillas in this case. Conservation has to be meaningful yeah, to people, economically, politically, and socially. It has to tick those boxes for it to be successful. Now, the models that don't tick those boxes have become too expensive for us.
What do you mean?
I'll give you a model of a colonial model that was introduced and now all our governments use. The protected area management.
Okay.
The zone of an area and say this is a protected area. In order to protect it, you need rangers. So you train rangers to do the patrols to protect people from this land. And so you need many of those. They will need to have guns. They will need to have cars,
Radios.
And they need to patrol the land perhaps 8 hours a day. Sometimes in case depending on which species. With rhinos, now they patrol 24 hours.
Yes.
Just think about fuel, think about salaries, think about uniform, think about equipment. Now, some areas, they fence even the park.
Yes.
Think about that expenses.
And they have to electrify it.
And they have to electrify it. That's expense. On average, if you use that model, you spend close to $3,000 per square kilometer with that model. Now, take a park like Serengeti.
Which is
Serengeti,
the size of Rwanda.
Yeah, Serengeti is almost the size of Rwanda.
Yes.
Yeah. How are you going to put fences on Serengeti in some parts? How many people? Yeah? Rwanda has a police force of about 30,000. How many rangers would you need to patrol Serengeti in order to secure it?
Yes. Fully secure it.
Yeah. How many vehicles would those rangers need?
No, that's billions of dollars.
Those are billions of dollars. Actually, Africa requires about $3 to $5 billion
just to
on that model to manage
their parks.
The 8,000 parks in Africa. There is no government. We know some NGOs and international groups that spend about average of about between $500,000 to $1 million a year running a park. Now, for a government, that has about 30 million people. 70% live below $1 a day. And you are asking that government to manage 6 parks.
Yes.
And spend $1 million a day running a park.
Of course, it won't work.
The worst of it is that how much that park contributes to the GDP. In order for government to spend that money. The math doesn't work. So that model doesn't work. And guess what? It hasn't given us the results. Because the model used across this continent, in many cases, it hasn't given us the results we want. And how do we know? Data doesn't support that. We lose more than 30,000 elephants a year because of that model.
Yes.
Despite that model. Rhinos are extinct in many countries despite that model.
Yes.
Lions are half the population in my lifetime despite that model. So the model needs to change. And that's our conclusion. What's our model? Now, to answer your question, our model is that in order to reduce those costs, and I personally believe that if animals would talk and ask them, what do you want us to do in order for you to survive? I guarantee that an elephant, a rhino, or a mountain gorilla will say, can you create a better relationship between me and my neighbors?
Yes.
I don't think a mountain gorilla will say, can you bring a gun and protect me? It will say, can you help me have a better relationship with my neighbor? That's where the answer is. That
Yes.
if you want to really protect these animals and trees and water basins, freshwater basins, you need to create a better relationship with their neighbors. How do you do that? By making sure that the value, the human species, because that's where the problem is,
Yes.
value the existence of their neighbors. If they don't, if Rwandese continue valuing a chicken
Or a potato.
or a potato more than
Over-
a mountain gorilla, you are going to spend a lot of money protecting a mountain gorilla. What did we do in Rwanda? About 30 years ago. We came in with, we protected a national park. We actually ran the park during the war in Rwanda. It's African Wildlife Foundation running the park because the
Which
government
park?
system had
The
volcanoes. The
yes.
system, the government was very weak. They never existed. There was a war going on. RPF was fighting. They were fighting. There was also a government. Really,
Yes.
there was a government, but
No one was really taking care of the
don't
animals.
take care. So we went in and ran the park with the help of WWF and FFI. We literally paid salaries for park officials. Government started building institutions, RDB and others. Those institutions were capable now of running the park. We left the management of the park to government institutions. Now we said, now we are going to deal with the tourism sector. We started building, together with government, a tourism industry around the park.
Yes.
You know what our first investment was? A lodge called Sabinyo.
As
In-
the African Wildlife Foundation.
Yes, in Kinigi. Before we built the lodge, we went and mobilized the community, now called Sakola community, into a cooperative called Sakola in Busanze. Yeah? And created a cooperative that can engage in tourism. We asked the government, can you allow this, instead of giving a concession to a private investor, can you give a concession to these people, group, which we've been managed? The government said, this is beautiful. This is what we want our people to do. So we said to the government, can you guarantee a few gorilla permits for these people? The government said yes. We said, okay. We went back to the Sakora community and we said we are going to build a lodge for you. We went to US government and said, really want to do this. US government gave us money. For the community, they gave community money. We came and built a lodge for the community. It was the first high-end lodge in Rwanda.
Yes.
It charges about $1,200 a day to stay there.
Yes.
It's a community lodge.
Yes.
But the community couldn't run it because of the caliber of customers. You know? So we told the community that you own this lodge, but training you to run it for people who's going to pay $1,200
A night.
a night, you really cannot. And that's not your skills set. What we need to do is to bring in a management company to run the lodge for you. So we flipped the whole investment plan. Instead of
protection, it became
investment. But also instead of communities, as the other models were, coming to a lodge to dance for tourists, coming to the lodge to wash bed sheets, yeah,
they have
coming
ownership.
coming to the lodge to sell crafts for $1 or $2 to tourists. They own the lodge.
Yes.
And instead of investors owning the lodge and hiring people, the communities are hiring the investor to come and run the lodge.
Fantastic.
And they hired a wonderful, one of the most prominent investment tourism companies here called Governors to come and run their lodge. And they did that for 12 years. Do you know what happened? The lodge was contributing between $300,000 to $300,000 to $500,000 annually into the local economy.
So now, all of a sudden, the locals see a direct correlation between their prosperity and the gorillas surviving.
Do you know what the local people did? Their first project? They built homes to every elderly widowed woman in the village. They built a house. That was their priority. Not AWF.
Their priority was housing.
They said housing their old people,
yes,
especially women. They did that. They're the first project. The second project is microfinancing. The third project was to get a school. The fourth project was scholarships. Because they did a primary school. Then after primary, where do their kids go?
Yes.
They said to provide scholarships. Microfinance project helped them survive COVID. But these are, because what we did is build that cooperative movement. You know, you need to go and talk to the chair of Sakola and hear this story. Very successful. And what happened to the gorillas? No gorilla has been poached.
Because they don't need it. They don't need to harm the gorillas.
Because that's where the money comes from. Nobody will stay in their lodge if they're not going to see gorillas.
So did the community like the fact that you, instead of distributing the land that you had to them, you gave it to the park?
Yeah, but guess what? They know the formula. You know, this lodge, for example, is on about 13 acres. 13 acres, you would get, if you are lucky, about $3,000 a year from potatoes. Now they are getting $300,000. Sometimes $500,000 a year from a 12-acre investment.
Yes.
They know the math. So now, to giving land to the park is really the idea that started by the conversation we had with the Rwanda Development Board, that they are having a good problem. They said, you helped us secure the mountain gorillas. The results are great.
Yes.
Nobody has killed them. The number is increasing. But we have another problem.
There's not enough space.
There's not enough space. They're killing each other because they're territorial. You know, even actually within the families, the father will kill the son.
Yes.
To maintain control over
dominance.
Dominance. So how can you help? We said, okay, so what are the options we have? We can buy land from people and expand the park. That's the colonial model. You know, buy land from poor people, kick poverty a little bit further,
yes,
and expand the park. Our idea, and that's what we told RDB, that the best way to expand this park is to help people invest in people's activities that will expand the park. And one of the questions is, how do you do that? We said, because what's happening in Africa, a lot of people who are living next to these national parks are involved in an economy that has nothing to do with the assets they live next to. Like, they are growing potatoes, but they are living near a mountain gorilla where people pay $1,500 to come and watch. It's
for
the most,
hour.
For 1 hour. For me, it's the most expensive product in the world. You pay $1,500, you don't eat it, you don't touch it,
no,
you don't go near it. You know,
you have to climb a mountain to get to
you
it.
Have to do. You experience it for 1 hour and you pay $1,500. But despite that, they are in potatoes. So they are living near an asset that running a completely different economy to the economy that they should be involved in. So we said, you know what? The way to expand the park is introduce a different economy that helps you to expand the park. And we said, they asked, give us an example. We said, these people, instead of growing potatoes, they should grow bamboo. He said, how does that work? Because they should have a bamboo economy. Bamboo is the food for mountain gorillas. But you can produce a very nice t-shirt from bamboo. You can produce a nice piece of furniture from bamboo. A nice handbag. You can build a nice house with bamboo construction material. Why are they growing potatoes? They should be producing bamboo products. So on their land, they should grow bamboo. And when they grow bamboo, they actually literally expand the park.
Because the gorillas will
come. The gorillas will come to eat the bamboo.
Yes.
So then what you will be dealing with is how do you manage and what management system do you put in place and policies that allow gorillas to come and eat bamboo, because they eat by pruning bamboo, they don't kill it. And people also to use. So that's the user policy. And so back to our land is that was to test out how this works. We gave the land to the RDB, the government of Rwanda, because guess what? We also brought in species of bamboo. And within the first 1 year, as we planted bamboo, indeed,
the gorillas were coming.
Gorillas were coming to eat bamboo because they had put cameras. And we said it works. And now what we are doing with the government of Rwanda is to actually to expand the park and apply the same mechanisms and say different, but although different economies. We are into bamboo is one of them. So we've did a land use plan, you know, what we call a master plan for the entire area around that park. Now we've showed the government through computer models that these are the areas that are going to flood. These are the areas where actually best for human settlement. These are the areas for agriculture. These are areas needs to be reforested. These areas needs to be for tourism. Because as gorillas come, we also expanding opportunities
for the tourists to enjoy
for tourists to enjoy. You know, that is the future of conservation. We are introducing very high value crops. You know, that people, we are going, you know, together with the government of Rwanda, we are increasing incomes at household level of people sometimes by more than 700%, but through very high value crops that they don't need 2 acres to do it.
I guess, you know, you're telling me this story and it's such a positive story, such a good story. But unfortunately, when I look at the world as it is, and not how I want it to be, or how a certain model works in a very specific country that, if I look at the world in its entirety, I sometimes feel, especially our continent, I feel scared. Between land pressure and climate change and all these other issues, I worry that there's a very high likelihood that in the next 100 years, the vast majority of Africa's large mammals will be extinct. That's how I feel. Am I being pessimistic?
No, you are not, if we continue doing the same things and expect different results. Because what we know is what we are doing is from conservation, but also from our choices of development, and not giving us the results that are going to sustain not only large mammals, wildlife on the continent. You know?
So not just the lions and the
the lions are indicator species.
Yes.
If the elephants die, the frogs can't survive.
Yeah.
The insects that can't survive because the elephants are gone. You know, if lions die, then the population of antelopes is going to explode. Then it's going to increase human wildlife conflict. And I mean, these are just indicator species that ecological systems are breaking down.
Yeah.
That's what it shows. But the reasons why is the choices we make.
Do you
So
see us
you
making
absolutely
different
right.
choices?
You're absolutely right to be pessimistic because you are looking at how we are approaching conservation. You are looking at how we are designing our economic prosperity. And you are saying we are doing the same things.
And hoping for different results.
Hoping for different results. We are doing the same things Europe did. And it has no big mammals.
No.
It has no wildlife.
No.
We are doing the same things China did. And it's paid the cost of climate change and pollution. So, unless we find the African model of development, you know, we are going to end where you think. But I'm more,
You're optimistic.
optimistic.
Why?
Because where we've worked, like I'll give you an example of Rwanda, this is Botswana, there's Kenya here, Uganda, where we've worked, you know, we've found out that actually, when you make the right choices, you know, you get the better results we want. And the conversation we've started from African Union, because we are the partners with African Union, to governments where we work in 17 countries, is help governments and the people of Africa to make the right choices on development that addresses the conservation needs. Because we know conservation is not going to succeed without development. And the development is not going to succeed without conservation. So we work at the intersection of those two. The question is not about how we are going to develop. Where are we going to carry out that development?
And where's the money going to come from?
Planning is critical. It's not about not having a road. It's where do you put the road? It's not having a hydropower generation. How do you build it? So it's not about stopping development.
Yeah.
It is how you do it and where is the question. And science provides that. In the projects we are having now, right here in Kenya, in Kajiado, we are planning the entire county with the new technology that allows us to determine the future of some areas and advising the counties that if you settle here, in 40 years, this area is going to flood.
Yes.
You know, this was going to happen to your forest if you continue doing what you are doing. And these are the repercussions. But you can do what you want to do there and not here, and you'll be successful. So it's really that conversation we need to have, which conservationists we hadn't, you know, done a good job of. We've been promoting conservation of animals and trees, and not linking it to the need of food security.
And the conservation of human beings.
And the protection and conservation of human beings. Because we know, which is primary education science, that without rain, you won't have food security.
Yes.
But we know where rain comes from.
Yes, it's from these trees.
But the conversation we've had as conservationists, it's as if trees are an end in itself. And you hear that with carbon credit conversation. It's like a tree has carbon, as if, and you are going to protect that tree. It's the same conversation hunters had with the lions. I want to hunt a lion, I need to protect it. It's a wrong approach. So the conversation we are starting, which I think I want you to be very optimistic, is that the approach is changing. And Africa are realizing that this is critical, that conservation is a healthy issue. Because we succeed in conservation, we are keeping viruses in the wild places, so we won't close our economies. So conservation is a healthy issue. Conservation is a food security issue because it maintains water underground, protects soils, fertile soils, and rain.
No, 100%. And the work that you guys are doing is so important. But here's one of the things that I worry about you.
Yes.
There's what they'd call an economic downturn in the world. And the work that you do costs money.
Yes.
Right? You give me an example
Yeah.
that, you know, when you were trying to do something in Rwanda, you were able to talk to the US government,
Yes, the government,
to get
yes.
funding,
Yes.
to start something that has now grown into a billion-dollar industry in Rwanda,
Yes.
close to a billion-dollar industry. But now we're seeing less generosity, right? Everyone's keeping their cards very close to
Yes.
their chests. They're not sharing, you know, the money that was probably coming from the West.
Yes.
They're now they're not thinking social services,
Yeah.
even for their own people. They're
Yes.
thinking, we need to buy firearms.
Yes.
The defense spending is
Yes.
skyrocketing.
Yeah.
Social spending is less.
Yeah.
I don't even want to think about
Yeah.
what that means
Yeah.
for the environment. So how does an organization like yours survive in that very harsh financial climate that's found globally?
By trying to, what we've been doing, even before this recent change, which came with the new administration in the US, that has looking at the America First policy and looking at the changes in foreign policy, which has happened, and other countries also checking themselves on what happens, and we've seen those changes. But the root 10 years ago, that's the conversation we've had within ourselves, and we are saying that Africa cannot outsource the responsibility of its core platform for our economic development, which is conservation. And that's science. We are not going to develop that conservation. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
We are a tropical continent. We need water. We need good soils. We need good climate for us to survive in this tropical climate. So we cannot outsource that responsibility. So we've been carrying, you know, those conversations in Africa, and we are succeeding.
How?
But here is what we need to do before really focusing on what we are doing as an institution. Let me talk as an African.
Yes.
You know, AIDS, scientifically analyzed, has never helped anybody
No.
since post Second World War, since the Cold War.
Yeah.
It has never helped any country to develop since the Cold War.
100%.
Aid worked after Second World War.
The Marshall Plan.
The
but
Marshall
that was
Plan.
very small.
And that was a model,
Yes.
yeah, for aid. And that's where the beginning of these aid programs, really, the mother of aid programs was the Marshall Plan. It was designed to support Europe to
reconstruct
to
after
reconstruct
the
aid,
damage.
but also to help US economy.
Yeah.
You know, so those two, again, development and aid, there has to be tied and there has to be benefit. Now, what happened with the aid, the Cold War came in and it distorted how aid works. You know, now aid with the choices, friendship, acquiring foreign policies started kicking in during the Cold War. You know, propaganda, branding, being liked, all got involved in aid after the Cold War. I mean, during the Cold War. You know, and that distorted where the Marshall Plan started from. Aid was good then. Then the Cold War ended. What did we do? We didn't change anything.
No.
Nobody, including Africans, which was our main role, the Cold War has ended. You know?
There's no more free lunch.
We never sat back with the international community to say, you know what? How do we restructure this? we continued the programs as if we still need other, we still need blocks, Western, Eastern, we need to acquire more countries and stuff. We continued all that through aid, yet it wasn't necessary. And where did it lead us to? Is really Africans outsourcing the responsibility. And the good thing about these changes that's happening now is to force us to reflect. As an African, this is the time for us to ask, how did we end here? That's the question I ask myself. How did Africa end here? How did we allow,
for our entire
a government program, which is USAID, fund, and for good reason, and with good intention from USAID, fund 65% of health sector of the largest economy in Africa, Nigeria. How did we end there?
Because it was free money.
How did we end there?
It was free.
And this is where the question Africans we need to ask ourselves. We can't blame anyone else. We are kidding ourselves. The problem is ours. For any African who has a mirror today, they should go and look in that mirror and see who they can blame
for the situation
we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
Because without USAID, all these countries are going to suffer. There's no doubt about that. So you can't blame USAID.
No, it's their money anyway.
But how did we allow that? How did we allow that to happen? That a foreign program can come to your country and fund an education system. Not only funding, but implement it. Because in many cases, when the USAID pulled out, even the implementation stopped.
Yeah, the teachers were not being paid.
How did we end there? That's the question Africans need to ask themselves. Now, coming back to us, because of that philosophy, because of that mindset, we really at 100% believe that this is the responsibility of Africans.
Okay.
And we are fortunate, although some of our budgets are funded by non-Africans, but we are very clear on how that, with our donors, where that money goes and how we are using it and the purpose. The purpose is to do the example I gave you in Rwanda. Let's support, give us money to support Sakola community to be independent of anyone else.
But then how does the foundation become independent of external funding? Because
we believe that our work is temporary. We don't want to be permanent.
You want to work yourself out of a job.
That is our principle. And I've just given you an example of Rwanda. We started running that park during the war. Rwanda came, government of RPF came, created a strong government. It was necessary for us to run the park. We handed it back to the government. And the government said, how can you help? We said we can help with tourism. But we did tourism, handed it to RDB. It was perfect. We left.
But you haven't.
Now RDB is calling us back. We have another problem. We are trying to expand the park. Yes. How can you help? But we've left twice. So we don't need permanent funding and in an area where we work. Except that Africa is big. So we left Rwanda, we went somewhere else.
But that's what I want to understand is the work is still necessary.
Yes.
Yes, Rwanda it might be a good case.
Yes.
But there are places, the Congo, there's South Sudan. There are places.
That's the work we are doing at a regional level.
So because where do you find the funding in this space?
It's actually most of the work is not really money. For example, the work we are doing, the discussion we are having at the African Union, is creating policies and sustainable financial mechanisms that are sourced out in Africa to run this kind of programs. You know? And we think that we are being successful in these conversations. You know? We had a conference we organized a conference in Kigali with the Rwanda government. That was the first time 2 years ago that Africa has sat down to talk about conservation.
Imagine.
As Africa.
Since we were independent.
Most African governments
since 1961. 61, 62.
62.
First time.
First time. But Africa has been talking conservation when we go to London.
Yes.
New York, Paris, Geneva, but with others. But as Africans, we never sat down to say, why is this important? Why do we need it? So we think that this conversation we've started, they are going to lead us into Africans.
Actually funding their own.
Because they must, if we are going to have sustainable energy.
Yes.
We must, if we are going to have sustainable food security. We must, if we are going to. Africa is the fastest urbaning continent in the world. You know, Kinshasa is the largest French-speaking city.
Yeah.
Lagos, very soon, it's going to be the largest English-speaking city.
That's crazy.
So, how are they going to provide water if they don't invest in conservation?
Now.
So these ideas and conservation discussions we are having now with Africa are very important.
Are African leaders listening to you?
Yes.
They're now saying...
I meet African leaders in my work, you know, and I know, I'll tell you a story. I know one of the African leaders who have told me in the first conversations, like I'm having with you, who told me that, Kaddu, I hear what you are saying, you know, and I believe in what you are saying, you know, but here is my problem.
Yes.
I've never met a voter who is asking for more elephants
Ish.
or more national parks. They want jobs.
They want water.
They want
shelter.
water. They want. Until I broke it down to him, how conservation, you know, links to jobs, to water, to health. You know what he told me? That, you know, you are the first person. This is our leader.
A full president.
A full president in Africa, somewhere, who I won't mention, telling me that it's the first time someone is telling him how conservation, you know, connects to agriculture, healthy, jobs, economy, you know, that he meets a lot of environmental groups who are telling him about elephants, importance of elephants. He even told me who have been trying to stop him from investing in a hydropower generation plant for his industry because of important breeding frog area. He's destroying. And he's saying, and I told him that, no, you know, the issue about those frogs, they help you determine the volume of water that's going through your dam. It's not about the frogs, it's about the water you need for your dam. And he says, that conversation, we are not having this conversation. So we are changing that conversation.
And I think that's why it's also so important that there's a black person, because it's a real thing, that our ability to speak to each other and actually understand what is important. Because you cannot have, it's rare that you'll find someone who's not from your home coming and telling you they won't understand what you actually need. So they'll care more about the frogs rather than the water. I think the fact that you, in your capacity as CEO, being called your name and looking like yourself, and then speaking to another African, it changes even the energy.
I don't know. You tell me, because I'm speaking to you. I think what I attribute it to is at a personal level. It's not. I don't approach this work from something I've learned from class.
Yes, it's your lived experience.
It's my lived experience. I think that's what's making. I don't think so. I believe that because I don't go out and work to protect elephants, because I know their behaviors, I understand everything about elephants. I have a PhD in elephant science.
You know,
or
you
whatever
have
it's
a
called.
PhD in human beings.
In human beings. But I believe that elephants support our life. And I'm trying to figure out how we can coexist without any biases of one thing being more valuable than the other.
I want to ask you the last question. And this one is, I want you to look into your crystal ball. When you look into the future 30 years, right, 3 decades from now, what does two countries that we've really talked about, right? There's Kenya, where you are based, Rwanda. I feel like those are 2 countries that have done quote unquote well in the conservation space. What does conservation look like in those 2 countries? What does wildlife look like in those 2 countries? Have we regressed in any way in 30 years, or are we even more of what we want to be?
Let me first modify your question a bit. Then I will answer. Okay. I will still answer it.
Okay.
But I want to add a third one, Africa in general.
Sure.
You know. Then I'll come to the 2 countries. I think that in general in Africa, I see, because 70% are young people, I see in 30 years that these young people, in 5 or 10 years, these young people are going to ask to run these parks for economic aspirations.
What do you mean?
To manage wildlife. Because it's an economic asset. You know, that if we continue the conversation I've been telling you, that conservation is a business. You know, I see that young Africans, you know, are going to take hold of their future as they understand the issues of climate change and how it connects to how they are going to live on this continent. They're going to demand more of their governments, and you are going to see increasing reduction of centrally governed national parks.
Okay.
You know, and these parks, you know, Musanze will be running volcanoes.
Yes. Not RDB.
Not RDB. Because the people near Musanze, these young people, would like their central government to tell them what are the benefits of this asset. Why is this asset in our province makes so much money
and it doesn't help us?
Whereas another province that has agriculture is benefiting more. For us, we can't have agriculture in this province because the park is big, it has taken all the land. Those questions have started here in Kenya.
Yes.
And it's in many countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. So I see that is the future is going to look like that. The other future of conservation of the continent.
Is that a positive or a negative?
It's positive.
Okay.
Because people are going to lead, they're going to benefit, and then they will start caring for wildlife. Those 3 go together. Conservationists will be investing so much in caring for wildlife without investing in benefiting and investing in Africans leading. These young people are going to lead. They are going to be increasing their benefits, not only from tourism, but in so many other industries. And they will start caring. Right now, they are not, and they have no reason to.
Yes.
The second thing, which is Pan-African, I see, is that the role of civil society is going to decrease. And that's why we are preparing AWF for that role. I see that our job today is to prepare the environment for private sector to take over the role we are doing currently.
Of conservation.
And
advocacy.
As advocacy, maybe that's an area. Conservation NGOs, civil societies could continue doing, and science and research. But this implementation of projects on the ground, because now it's business, you know, we need to create space for those who are looking for profit to invest in conserving mountain gorillas like people of Musanze, because they earn between $300,000 to $500,000 a year. They should be the ones, investing in taking care of mountain gorillas. That is the future. Private sector, not civil societies. To be sustainable, wildlife cannot continue being a charitable activity. If you agree with me that conservation is so important for our survival as Africans, economically and culturally, we can no longer outsource it on a charity basis. Yeah, to sustain it.
Yes.
Because it's so critical for us. Now, for Rwanda
and Kenya.
Already here in Kenya, let me start with Kenya. Conservation is very successful. I see number of wildlife is increasing. I see tourism numbers, arrivals are increasing. I see a lot of infrastructure needed for tourism and its services, and the value chain around the conservation industry increasing.
Yes.
In Kenya, But also I see a challenge Kenya will have.
What is that?
Increased human-wildlife conflict. Because we cannot continue focusing on increasing number of wildlife. You get the Rwanda problem. I call it the Rwanda problem. I call it the Zimbabwe and Botswana problem.
You become so successful at conserving.
The number of elephants will increase. And where are you going to get space? As the number of human populations also increase. So I also see that human-wildlife conflict is going to increase tremendously.
And then what happens?
Yes. We are already working on it. I'm having conversation with insurance companies 2 months ago.
Yes.
Because human-wildlife conflict has to be uninsurable, like any risk.
That when my maize,
and the elephant
comes and eats it,
this is my insurance. So again, the private sector need to take over the work, and regulations and penalties. And there has to be more work to be done on how do you control the population of elephants. And that work is already has started.
I was wondering, in Zimbabwe, there's a controversy, I don't know if it's Zimbabwe or Namibia or one of those southern African countries, about culling of elephants, that the numbers are too big. We might just have to kill a few.
Do you know the source of the controversy? It's, you get it. The controversy about these big mammals, when I'll give you an example. When Botswana, which has the most elephants, African elephants in the world.
Yes.
More than 200,000 elephants in one country. Think about that.
That's a lot.
Think about that.
And I think their population is 3 million people.
Yeah. And they live in a quarter of a country because the rest is a desert.
Yes.
So they are sharing a quarter of that country with the elephants.
Yes.
And the government says, you know what, we are going to allow hunting and killing 300 elephants a year. Do you know where the demonstrations were?
In
London?
Yes.
New York?
Yes.
Tokyo?
Yes. The people who don't actually live with them.
They're not in
Gaborone.
or Kinshasa, or Kigali,
or Nairobi.
Or Nairobi.
No.
The idea, that, do you know why? Let me explain why. Do you know why the demonstration in Tokyo?
Because that's where, I don't know, is that where the lobby is?
Because because the elephants, their love of elephant is emotional. Someone said that there are more elephants in London than in Botswana. You know why? Because the number of babies that go to bed with a stuffed elephant are more than the elephants in Botswana, in Europe, compared to Europe. So their idea of an elephant is a stuffed elephant.
And you cannot kill the stuffed elephant.
As they grow up.
Yes.
It can't hurt you. In Botswana, the kids that live next to this elephant
Are terrified.
Their idea of an elephant is when their parents come and tell them that last week an elephant ate all our corn, maize, farm. I can't pay school fees.
Yeah.
You can't go to school. Or your mother is sick. I can't take your mother to hospital because the hyenas ate the goats. Or the leopards ate the sheep. You know?
It's a totally different worldview.
It's a different worldview of these animals. You know? So that's why until, I said this before, until Africans in Botswana, in Kenya, in Uganda, value an elephant equal or more than a chicken. A chicken pays school fees.
It gives protein.
It gives protein, pays school fees, pays medical bills. An elephant doesn't to a household that lives anywhere near an African national park. We cannot, that's why it has to benefit, it has to, people have to lead Africans, and that's when they will care. It's as simple as that. And we've tested it in areas where we work, and it works. When that happens, what we are dealing with, how do you scale that up at a national level? And that's the conversation we are having. But it is not going to happen until that happens. I'm optimistic with the young Africans. You know, and I tell my generation, who are mostly in power now, that if you cannot create benefits from elephants to Africans, either get out of the way, or your job is to protect them until you leave, and the young Africans are going to find the value in there. Because you cannot have an asset that's only found here.
And
You
the
know,
worst thing
and
is,
sell them. This is an interesting part, and I'm not an economist. You know how much people pay to stay in a lodge in Mara, in Kenya?
hundreds
A
and
night?
thousands of dollars.
There is a lodge of $10,000 a night.
Jeez.
There is a $5,000 a night. There is $2,000 a night. Do you know how much they pay to enter a park?
No, tell me.
$20, $40. Do you know how much they pay a plane ticket?
Thousands.
So how can KLM
Make
or Kenya
money.
Airways or Air Rwanda make more money than the park service from a tourist coming to a country? And the reason they are coming is to see mountain gorillas. And they are buying a ticket for $3,000 to sit in a business class. Why? They've come to see mountain gorillas, and they're paying $1,500 to pay a mountain gorilla. But they pay a lodge $2,000 a night, including the Sakora. They pay Sakora community, which I love, $1,500 a day. And they pay $1,500 to pay a gorilla. So our young people are going to figure it out. The giraffe, the last dinosaur, it's the tallest mammal on earth. Try to go and sit in a Kagera. In fact, Rwandese probably go for free. I don't know.
It's like a little bit of money, not too much.
It can't be more than $20. And international people, it can't be more than $50 or $100.
Sure.
This is the last. It's the tallest mammal on earth. People should be bidding to come and see it.
We haven't valued our own heritage, I guess.
These young people will figure it out. That's the future of conservation. And that's how important to us. We are failing to find a value. My generation. My appeal to the young generation. Focus on that. Because the entire continent, the entire world come to Africa because of our natural resources. Whether it's Victoria Falls makes less money than Bujab Falls in Dubai. You know how many people see it a year? 1.5 million. A day, 300 people. At the mall in Dubai.
Yeah.
It's artificial fall. Do you know how many see Victoria Falls? Less than 1 million. It's a heritage site. It's a global wonder.
But we don't value it.
You know? And what my appeal to young people is that this is the biggest asset Africa has. They need to pay attention to it. For business, but also they won't survive on this continent. They won't afford a house because they won't afford energy like I did. Because when I grew up, who bought mineral water when I was growing up? They are now. You know, things are going to become very expensive because we are not dealing with nature. So their world, they need to focus on nature. And guess what? The best part of it, they are the most educated Africans that have ever walked on this planet.
Sure.
They are more exposed than any other African. You know, they are more African. You talk to young Rwandese, they're African.
Truly.
True Africans. You know, they have friends in Nigeria, they have on their internet, they have friends in Japan and Tokyo, in everywhere in the world. They are global. They are going to sort this out. And
they have no choice.
Yeah, they have no choice. You know, sometimes there are these natural callings. You talked about it when we were at the beginning, that, you find yourself in situations. And I tell young people, you find yourself in this kind of situation, that your war that has chosen you is climate change. My father's generation was independence. That was their war. They had no choice. As they became educated, it was independence.
And
they had to get rid of colonialists. Bits of my generation, for us who are in 60s, 70s, ours was economic independence, and we failed. It was economic independence. After independence, it was economic independence.
We failed.
We failed economic independence, but that was the calling of my generation. It's economic independence and political transparency. We failed on the continent. Now, these young people, whether they like it or not,
it's climate change.
It's climate change and political transparency. But climate change is going to... Politics, they might survive, because survive wars.
Yes.
Climate change, we've already seen it, in Central Africa. Central Africa and North Africa, it's a security issue.
Yeah.
Rural areas are empty because of climate change. We've looked at the work around Lake Chad. It's the third of what it was just 20 years ago.
And that's where all ISIS is coming from now.
Yeah. Boko Haram, the rural economies have collapsed because of climate change. So sometimes these young people, that is their war, and they cannot give excuses. That's what I tell them. Some of them say, we are young, we want permission. I said, who gave permission to Nyerere? He was in his 20s. Or your president in Rwanda. Who gave him permission?
Took ownership.
He took ownership. He was not old. Nkrumah. All these guys were in 20s. Mandela, 20s. When they took on independence. They were teenagers. And guess what? They didn't have internet. And I always visualize, if Nyerere could Facebook,
what would he have done?
Nkrumah.
He would have burnt the whole country.
Yeah, he could send a video message.
Yeah.
you know, or WhatsApp Haile Selassie, this continent will be different.
That's something to think about. Kaddu, thank you so much for spending time with me.
Thank you for having me.
This was really exciting. I've learned a lot. I feel a bit more hopeful that the people who are leading our conservation efforts have our best interests at heart and have a plan, because that's a bit of my worry.
No, thank you very much for this conversation, and I hope that our friends outside Africa will also watch this and understand that as Africans, we are just the custodians. You know, the work we are doing here also benefits the entire world through the global challenges like climate change. If Africans choose to cut down the Amazon, the Congo Basin, Europe will flood. So when we say that financing of conservation is coming here, who is helping who? So these are global assets, but benefiting people differently. You know, it's not an African problem to solve, but it's our responsibility to deal with.
Yeah.
So we cannot outsource our responsibility as custodians, you know, but these are global assets benefiting the entire planet. You know, the world needs to pay attention and help where they can, but they cannot take responsibility.
And they cannot take ownership.
They cannot take ownership. That is where the buck stops, you know, but we are doing the work for the entire planet. And it has to be done that way.
Thank you so much for joining me on the long form.
Thank
I
you.
really enjoyed it. I hope this might be your first podcast. I hope it's not going to be your last.
Thank you. Anytime, reach out as you have done. Thanks so much for reaching out.
100% will.
And that's a wrap for this week's episode. Thank you so much for sticking with us until the very end. I'd actually love to hear your thoughts on today's conversation. So drop a comment below and join the discussion. You can also join us on the social media of your choice. And if you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with a friend and invite them to the conversation. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care.